At the worst time of my entire life, I had a wonderful woman working for me, Betty Harper, who is here this evening. And she just beautifully said to me, "You need help." And she told me that she had heard of a man named Milan that had really helped a lot of people. And so I asked what his last name was, and she said Yerkovich. And I said, I think I will be able to pronounce that one day. And I have learned to do that. But Milan helped me through a really tough time, and I got to understand the wisdom that both Milan and his wife, Kay, have, and invited them on the program, and people loved them. And Milan, share a little bit about your experience or what you think is important about the program.
Well, if I think we take all of these things that we've all discussed here and we must put them into a culture of grace, because if we don't impose grace upon all of these things, we will end up becoming legalistic, or we will end up having attitudes where we don't have acceptance. And I think there's two ways we need to learn grace, and those of us on the show learn it and we practice it, as well as what we try to help people understand is we need to exercise grace to ourselves, because sometimes we can be very hard on ourselves as people. We will not give ourselves slack, and we drive ourselves, and we are not kind to ourselves. And then, of course, we need to learn to exercise grace toward other people. And that's not easy to do. That's part of the sanctification journey, but we must learn to experience it first through the cross. For by grace we've been saved through faith, and that not of yourselves. It's a gift of God, not as a result of works, lest any man should boast. But I think there's two kinds of grace that impress me. One is a quiet grace. A quiet grace sometimes just lets things go. If we picked up every battle every day, either toward ourselves or toward others, we'd be in constant battle with ourselves and others. That's what I call a quiet grace. And then there's a noisy grace. A noisy grace is the cross, where God made a lot of noise. He said, I want you to understand there's something at stake here. I'm holy, you're separate. I'm going to allow the second person of the Trinity, my Son, to take your sin upon him that you might live. And that was a noisy event where it was announced clearly where a person is violating God's boundaries, where he's violating his will, where he or she is harming him or herself. And then he says, if you walk across this blood-stained wooden beam called the cross toward these open arms of love and grace towards you, but you accept my grace on your terms, or on my terms, then I will lavish you with grace. And that's a noisy kind of grace that tells you all about why you're giving it to them, and it requires something of another person first before you give it to them. Maybe an apology, maybe forgiveness, something along those lines. So I would have to say, Steve, that this is a show that lavishes itself in grace, God's grace.